Hi everyone, once again, thanks for joining us. For those of you who's just joined, welcome to our show. So what we'll be discussing today is the crucial topic of how to navigate and stand out in the UX job market. We have an amazing guest speaker for you today who is basically one of the pioneers of the UX field and has an incredible amount of experience in this field. Who will share lots of insights with you today and answer lots of your questions. We'll introduce our wonderful guest in just a moment, if he needs an introduction. So, for those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Michael, and I'm the founder of a New York City-based company called BeginX. It is a part-time UX career accelerator based on real mission-driven client projects that helps people who know UX basics transition into the field in one of the most effective ways by not just getting the hard skills, but also the crucial soft UX skills and building a strong portfolio with several real client team projects and real work experience while getting hands-on career prep to master UX job search and interviewing necessary to land a UX role. And I don't mean this to brag or anything like that, but just to want to give you a little bit of background for credibility purposes. So we have run many virtual program cohorts and helped around 160 people or so get hired into UX roles at many well-known companies. Now let's get to the most fun part and introduce our awesome guest speaker, and then we'll jump into the talk and interview after that. So really excited to introduce Jared Spool, who I'm sure nearly everyone in the UX community already knows. Just to give you a bit more background, Jared is one of the UX pioneers and top thought leaders of the UX field, known for his work in usability and human factors in design. Jared is the co-founder and co-CEO at Center and the founding principal and CEO at UIE, User Interface Engineering, a leading research, training, and consulting firm specializing in website and product usability. He has been instrumental in shaping the way we think about UX design today, particularly through his extensive research and insights into user behavior and the importance of good design and digital products. On top of that, he is also an amateur magician. So, Jared, it's so great to have you here again. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to have the discussion with you. And first, so Jared will do a talk and we'll cover many different questions about this important topic. Then we'll jump into the interview and also take as many questions from the audience as possible. All right, so with that said, I'd like to hand it over to Jared Spool.
Thank you, Michael. It's lovely to be here. I'm excited that you've invited me back for a second time. I guess I wasn't awful enough the first time, but I will work harder. What I thought I'd do is talk for 20 or so minutes, 25 minutes. And in that process, I'm going to leave some loose ends open. So I'll introduce some ideas, but I won't necessarily draw conclusions for all of them, so that you all can help me, sort of finish this discussion with the questions that you have, and we make it more relevant. I found when doing these presentations on Zoom, since we can use the Q&A as a way to get what you are most curious about, I don't have to make guesses about what you're interested in, but instead I can rely on you to tell me what you're most interested in. So that's how I was thinking about doing this. But the topic for today is how to navigate and stand out in the UX job market. And I want to start with just a sort of explanation of what's going on in the job market, because it's relevant to what we're doing. The UX job market is unlike anything we've seen in a really, really long time. And the reason that it's unlike that is because it's what we call inverted. There are many more people looking for work than there are positions to have them. And that's not the way it was as little as 3 years ago, where there were actually many more open positions than there were people to fill them. And so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time explaining what changed. But before I talk about what changed, I want to be clear about what didn't change. Um, because there's a bunch of theories out there about why the job market is a mess right now, and I just want to put to bed some of the mythology around it. So first, there's a perception that somehow or other UX has lost any sort of respect from executives or um, stakeholders, and that's why UX people were being laid off at a higher rate than other job categories. Turns out they weren't laid off at a higher rate than other job categories. Um, uh, Facebook, for example, laid off between 2022 and 2024. They laid off about 20,000 people, of which only a few hundred were UX people. So that's not what was happening. There's another myth that stakeholders and executives somehow no longer consider UX to be valuable. That when you talk to executives, they think it's extremely valuable. There's another myth that they're planning to replace UX people with AI. There's no evidence that anyone has been replaced or anyone is planning to replace anyone in the UX world with AI. So, all of these things are myths. This is not what's created the mess. What's created the mess is sort of this sort of interesting history that starts around the time of the pandemic. Up until the pandemic, we were growing, the UX field was growing at a particular rate, right? If you were to plot it out over time and you were to look at growth, what you'd see is that the UX field was on a steady growth path. And then in 2021, we start to see a big change, and it spikes for about a year and a half. And so 2021, 2022, and at the beginning of 2023, we start to see a spike, and then it starts to drop at 2023. And the reason for this spike is that, ignore this little bit there. The reason for the spike actually has nothing to do with UX. The reason for the spike was that the Biden administration in the Inflation Recovery Act had put a tax credit for R&D employees, and that R&D tax credit basically paid companies a dividend for hiring and retaining large numbers of tech workers. And so big companies like Facebook, Meta, Amazon, Twitter, a bunch of them, Microsoft, started hiring for speculative projects, right? The metaverse, self-driving cars, a bunch of crypto projects, and they were hiring, and they were so afraid that their competitors would get the best people that they were hiring at an excessive rate and paying really incredible salaries to get people to join their organization instead of their competitor's organization. And as a result, we saw this big spike in tech, and UX was part of that. So all these people joined to work on self-driving cars in the metaverse and all these things. And then Congress, the Republicans, you can always blame the Republicans for these things. The Republicans did not renew the tax credit, not because it was a bad idea, but because it was not their idea. And suddenly, all these companies were having to pay a lot more money to keep these employees employed. And so they decided to let them go because there was no metaverse. Crypto didn't go anywhere. Self-driving cars weren't going to be the future. So suddenly we see this big set of layoffs that just happened because all these speculative projects were there. And then once the gates were open for that, other companies started laying people off, not in the volumes that we saw from the tech companies, but they started laying people off too that they felt were, excessive costs. Deadwood, as it were, is what the phrase is. They did a bit of house cleaning because every so often that's what companies do. While at the same time, inflation started to set in, and we saw rising interest rates. And investors, up until that point, were basically at zero interest rate. As interest, there was not much interest coming out of banks or other vehicles. So they were looking to tech companies to make their money, right? Because they want more money they want to take out more money than they put in. So they need some sort of returns. When interest rates started to grow, the returns of the tech companies were looking less and less interesting, especially because none of these projects, with the exception of AI, seemed to show any potential. So they started demanding their money back. There were a bunch of stock buybacks, and that created more layoffs and more cost reduction. So we kept seeing this happening. But if we look at 2024 and beyond, what we see is the UX field is starting to grow again. And it's basically right on track from where it was before that weird spike in 2021, 2022. So this market is where there aren't fewer UX jobs than there were back in 2021. There are more UX jobs than ever. Right now, we estimate that there's probably about some estimates go as high as 2 million UX people. I remember back in the mid 2000s, we were thinking that maybe there would be 100,000 UX people, but now there's at least 1 million, possibly 2 million UX people, and in the world, and most of them are employed. Right? The vast majority of these people have jobs today. So that's not what's causing the mess in the job market. It's not that everybody's unemployed. What's causing the mess is that we had this sudden flood of laid off people in a system where we had, before all this, we had more jobs then we had people to fill it. But with this sudden flood, that's created an inversion. And it's been made worse because at the same time, there were during this spike, boot camps really geared up the number of people that they were graduating every month. And that created thousands of newly minted UX professionals with 0 years of experience into the market. And at the same time, we saw this change in the way automated hiring and application systems were working. And suddenly it became really easy to apply for jobs. Back when I was applying for my first jobs in this field, you literally had to put your resume into an envelope and send it to the HR department with a stamp on it. Now you can go online and you can apply to 100 jobs in a day if you're really committed to doing it. There's nothing stopping you. And because the amount of friction to apply for jobs has reduced, we now see, in essence, thousands of hundreds or thousands of people applying for every job, and that's created a bunch of mess. And then on top of that, companies since the pandemic have been more open to remote positions. And when you're working remote, you can be anywhere, which means that in the olden days, if you wanted to apply for a job, it had to be within your relative commuting distance, right? Here in Boston, you had to, I would have to consider, is it on the North Shore of Boston or the South Shore? Because if it's on the South Shore, I'd have to move. But if it's on the North Shore, I could potentially get there and back in a almost reasonable amount of time. And so those types of questions were relevant back when we were in office. But when companies started saying, well, we could hire people remotely, you no longer had that as a constraint. So now you could apply to jobs remote jobs almost anywhere. So now we have even more applications for every position. And so this is what has made the market a bit of a mess. And every job that gets posted has hundreds, sometimes thousands of people applying for it. It's a mess for both the hiring managers and for the candidates. And now you have to think very differently about how you apply and what that application looks like. And that's the world that we're in. The world that we're in is one where things that we could get away with as early or late as just 3 years ago, we can't get away with anymore. Back in 2020 or in pre-pandemic times, 2019, but even like in the first year of the pandemic, you could just sit down in a darkened room and whisper, I'm a UX person. And 5 recruiters would just appear out of thin air and start trying to get you to come interview at their company first so they could be the first to make you an offer. And so all of that has changed. And because all of that has changed, we no longer can get by just showing up and saying we are UX people. We actually have to prove that not only are we UX people, but we're good at what we do. And most importantly, we have the experience necessary to do a really good job. So for the last couple of years, I've been working with people who are looking for work, looking for a job. Some of them are freshly out of work. Some of them have been out of work for a long time. And sort of going through what it means to get hiring managers to be um, a um, uh, to jump out of the hiring process. So I thought I'd share some of the things that I've been learning in this process. And the first one is that this urge to apply to as many jobs as possible, stop that. It's not helping. It doesn't get you looked at. You'll find, my guess is, if that's the path you've gone down, you'll find that you don't hear from most of the recruiters or companies that you apply to, that every job has hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants, and you're just trying to enter a lottery and get picked. And it's not effective. It's a waste of your time. You're wasting the hiring manager's time because they feel the need to go through all these things. And there's a very good chance that the job that you're applying to, you are not qualified for. And that's one of the things that's changed. One of the things that's changed is this definition of what it means to be qualified. Because in the olden days, the sort of pre-pandemic, pre-spike, pre-layoff days, the what it took to get hired was you just had to produce some sort of evidence that suggested you knew something about design. There was no expectation you know anything about the industry that the company was in. There was no expectation that you would know specifics about the 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 technology or the algorithms or anything to do. You'd know anything about the users, right? Your one job, you might work in healthcare. The next job, you might work in finance. The next job, you might work in industrial processing, and it didn't matter. The expectation was that you would be trained when being brought on to the organization. But that doesn't exist anymore. When hiring managers have hundreds of applicants, they can be pickier about who they hire. Back in the olden days, there were more positions than there were candidates. Therefore, it took a long time to find somebody. And if you were overly picky, you just made the hiring process that much more difficult. But if you were, in this day and age, if you are a hiring manager, you can afford to be picky. In fact, you pretty much have to be, because that's how you will eliminate the vast majority of people applying for the positions. And sure, with enough time and energy, they could learn what they need to learn to do the job. But what you really want, if you're a hiring manager, is you want that person to get up to speed faster. One of the things that people don't realize is that to be able to open a position for advertising, a hiring manager has to jump through a ton of hoops. In particular, they have to jump through the hoops of convincing senior management that hiring someone is, in fact, the best way to get a whole bunch of work done that's not getting done. Either they have people on their team who are too busy and therefore not doing quality work because they're being spread too thin, or or there's work that's not getting done that they really need to get done. And so they have that work that they want to give this new person in mind. And they have to convince their senior management that there's enough of that work that it's worth bringing someone else onto the payroll, which is a recurring expense that they have to then deal with. So it increases costs. There's all sorts of issues around this. The average UX person, even though salaries aren't necessarily this high, the cost of a UX person is often close to $200,000 US for each new person you bring in, which means if you want to hire 5 new people, you have to have $1 million worth of budget to do that this year. And that that type of growth right now in this economy is something that companies push back on. So you have to really make a case, which means that the person you bring on better do $200,000 worth of valuable work in order to justify their existence. And so when a hiring manager is looking at your materials, that's the question they're most interested in. Are you worth $200,000 or more to my organization? And you have to prove to them that you can come up to speed quickly, you can be productive quickly, and the value of the work you produce is going to be equal to that large amount of money. And that's what they're looking for when they're considering your application materials. So if the hiring manager works in finance, in brokerage services, and they're working on trading desk software, if you have worked in brokerage services on trading desk software, you are golden to that hiring manager because that's stuff they don't have to teach you. But trading desk environments in brokerage services are really complicated. And in the olden days, we could fake it, but we can't do that anymore. So you need to have what we call the comparable experience. The hiring manager wants to see in your resume, your portfolio, even in your cover letter, it needs to jump out of those documents that you have trading desk experience in brokerage services. You might have trading desk experience in futures markets, but that's not the same thing. You might have brokerage services experiences working with financial advisors, but that's not the same thing. And if you don't have financial services at all, you are not qualified for that position. So what you need to do to navigate this is you need to scrutinize the job position, the website, the product offerings. You need to know in detail what it is the company does so that when you apply, you can talk to that specifically. So that's the second tip, right? Which is to make sure that your materials talk specifically to what is required to that job. You need to demonstrate your comparable experience. Comparable experience is the evidence that you have done this before. And your materials need to shout loud and clear, I have done what you need to get done before. I would love to do it again. I could do it for you, and I would do a damn good job. That's the thing that people need to get a job these days. If you don't have that, you should skip right by that position and look for something that does, that you have. That's the most important thing. The next piece of advice that I give folks is that they should be really focusing on their network. Now, this particular advice is often misinterpreted. People think that the way that you network is that you send a message, a direct message in LinkedIn to the hiring manager asking if you can have coffee. But if they have 150 applicants, they can't afford to have 150 coffees. So that's not networking. Networking is something much simpler, but it's something that you have to do over a long period of time. And if you haven't started networking when you're first on the job market, you've missed a whole bunch of opportunities. It's not too late to start, but it's not going to be as effective. And by networking, what I mean is it's actually a very simple activity. And it's not nearly as nerve-wracking as asking practical strangers if you can have coffee with them, because that's just weird. What it is you make a list of everybody and anybody who might know your work. If you've been in the business for a while, it should be a lot of people. People you've worked with as peers, people who were your managers, people who you managed, people who were product managers or developers that you worked with, anybody who would actually know that you do good work and that you are pretty awesome as a UX person. And then what you do is you make a plan that every day you're going to reach out to at least one of these people. You're going to find a way to talk to them, whether it's a direct message on LinkedIn, connecting to them on LinkedIn, or finding an email address or something. You find some person that you want to reach out to, and you just reach out to them. You just say, hey, Michael, it's been a long time and I've been thinking about you. How are you doing? That's the whole first message. The only thing you ask for is, how are you doing? You don't say, I'm out of work. Do you know of any jobs? You just say, how are you doing? Now, Michael, being an absolutely easygoing and fun guy, he's going to be excited to hear from you because he liked you. And he's going to reply and answer your question. He's going to say, I'm doing okay. We just had a wonderful holiday break. My family and I have been had a quiet time. I'm now working at BeginX, and I'm really excited with the work that we're doing there, and it's been good. And then he's going to do the thing that really nice people do. He's going to say, how are you? And then in your reply, you're going to say, well, it's been a weird year. I was laid off in the middle of the year. And up until that point, I'd been doing some really great work. The layoff was a little bit of a surprise, but that's just how things are. I'm excited about my next opportunities. I've been looking around for some good stuff. And I think it's going to be a good year for me. And then you stop. You don't ask, do you know of any jobs? And the reason you don't ask that, there's two reasons. The first one is, Michael's a nice guy and he can read in between the lines. If he knows of a job, he's going to tell you. But if he doesn't know about a job, you haven't put him in a position of saying, geez, golly, I'm sorry. That sounds awful. I don't know of any jobs, right? You leave it in a good place. And the second reason is you don't want Michael walking away from this conversation to think, well, I hadn't heard from this person in a million years. Now I only hear from them when they're asking me for a job. So you want them to actually be excited to hear from you again. If they know of something, they're going to tell you. And maybe 2 weeks from now, they learn about something. And because you're fresh in their mind, they're going to say, I know someone who could do this job. So suddenly, they know how to reach out to you. And if you keep in touch with them on a regular basis, when a job comes, they're going to tell you about it. It's just the human nature. People want to help other people. So that's what's going to happen. So you don't have to ever ask anyone for a job. They will tell you if they know of one, if they know that you are trying to figure out what your next job is going to be. So they're just going to make the connection for you. So you don't have to do that. So that's key. We've gotten to a point where I should let y'all start driving this conversation. I know there's a million questions that people might have. My understanding is there's this lovely tab at the bottom of your screen that, weirdly enough, is labeled Q&A. Go ahead, put the Q in there if you want. You can even put the A in there. But let's do that. And Michael, what do you want to do next? How are you doing, by the way?
Awesome. That was great. That was great. Thank you, Jared. I'm doing great, and thank you for the example. I appreciate it. All the kind words, really appreciate it.
There you go.
All right. So it looks like we have starting to have some questions popping up in that Q&A tab. So just a quick reminder, please put your questions there again. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible, hopefully all of them. And please just make sure you focus on the topic that we're discussing. So if you have some other questions unrelated to standing out in the UX job market, we might not get to it. But yeah, so I already see a few of them. Let's actually start with Q&A and with the Q&A tab. And then, Jared, I have quite a few questions prepared for you, even though you actually answered some of them already in your talk.
I'm sorry. I should have left them.
No, that's good. That's great. All right. And by the way, just a quick reminder for everyone, you can actually upvote questions as well. So please review each other's questions, upvote them, and this way we know like which ones you guys are most interested in. All right, so I have quite a few questions here. All right, so I know Jacqueline was first. Okay, so it's a little bit of a longer question, but let's just start with that. And I don't see many upvotes
Jacqueline's
yet.
MO. So Jacqueline and I go back a long way.
All right, amazing. So Jacqueline is asking, as a former, it's a pretty specific question, right? So as a former federal employee, do you have a sense of how a potential likely hiring freeze within the first week of the Trump administration, how this hiring freeze will affect federal hiring processes for applications that are 6+ months into the hiring process? I'm asking because I'm a finalist in Group A, most qualified for a role with the CFPB, but it seems highly unlikely that CFPB will have time to interview and hire tentative or final offers to applicants before January 20th. So quite a few details, Jared. Hopefully you remember all that.
Yeah, no, I know what she's talking about. So CFPB is the Consumer Finance Protection Board. And so I spent a year in the Obama White House, and I worked on talent hiring when I was there. So I know a little bit about hiring processes. Now, the big question here isn't hiring processes. The big question here is what's going to happen with the new presidential administration. And if you think anybody can predict what's going to happen with this new president, I wouldn't believe them for a minute. I don't even think the new president can predict what's going to happen with the new president. So it's not clear. But the buzz around people I know who are inside is because the billionaires club that the new president has recruited is very anxious to stop other people from earning a paycheck. They are looking to put a government-wide hiring freeze. Nobody knows the details. It's not clear anybody has actually thought through the details. It's going to be a disaster because people are. It's normal when the administration changes for people to leave jobs. It's a good sort of wrapping up point and chance to move on, especially when the administration changes parties. People are ready to go do something different, and they feel like they've gotten to a good point. Federal employees, particularly not the political employees, but the millions of employees that are not a million or so of employees that are not appointees but are just lifetime employees. They often stay from one administration to the next, except that there are something like 20 some odd percent of the workforce, if I remember the statistic right, is actually close to retirement age or at retirement age. So a lot of people are going to retire. And if there's hiring freeze going on in the federal government right now, what that means is, or if there is going to be one in a couple of weeks, what that means is that the people who are retiring are not going to be replaced. And there's going to be a loss of understanding on how to do the jobs, and it is going to be there. So right now, it's anybody's game. But if there's a hiring freeze, there's a hiring freeze. No one's allowed to move forward on any hiring process when there's a freeze. So if you are in Group A, you will stay in Group A until you withdraw, until the freeze is lifted, and then they'll restart the hiring process. And that's just the way it's going to work. There won't be any background checks or security checks. Any of those things will just grind to a halt. That's my understanding.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. All right, so let's take a question from Sihaya. So Sihaya is asking, if you do not have previous UX work experience, what's the best way to familiarize people with your work to establish a valuable network?
Establishing a network, I mean, there's a bunch of ways people can get people who don't know your work to know your work. One is to publish it. I don't mean taking screenshots and putting them up on Behance. That's not an effective way to publish work per se, but to take a project and document it and publish what you document, right? Say, this is how I tackled a problem. And then you have this nice little case study that you've written up that people could see what your work is about. But the best way to get someone to see your work is to do work with somebody. And paid work isn't the only opportunity. There are lots of organizations in the world that could benefit from better tools and experiences, everything from church groups to, community book clubs to, a group that meets at the public library to play Dungeons and Dragons on a regular basis. All of these things are opportunities for you to go in, see a need, and working with the people in that little group, build something that they would see benefit from. And all those people are also possibly working full-time jobs, and they might know of something at their organization or might have a friend who's looking for someone at their organization, and they would say, oh, there's this person in my church group. She wrote this little app that helps us keep track of the Sunday school admissions, and it's really good. And maybe she could be, I know she's looking for work, maybe she could be helpful in your organization. And so there are opportunities. Check with your friends and family members as to what things they do or where they are. Could they use an app or a website or something to help organize things? Find other people who might also be in between positions who you could work with on something like this, and build something. I don't have any magic wand that would just make you more appealing to a hiring manager, other than you have done good stuff. Keep in mind that there are lots of good reasons for a hiring manager to hire somebody who's early in their career. I mentioned that $200,000 number, and that includes salary and benefits and the equipment that they give you to work, and the electricity it costs to run the servers you use, and your Figma license, and all the other things that they have to pay for you to be employed at their organization. Even the plastic for your badge costs money. So when you add all that up, that's where you get to that $200,000 number. But for someone who's early in their career, salary is always the biggest part of that formula. And someone who's early in their career has the advantage of demanding less salary than someone who's more experienced. And to a manager, if you can do the work, why not get someone who costs a little less than someone who is more experienced but does the same work? So look for those opportunities. Right now, it's not unusual for people to do multiple internships. Use those as networking opportunities. Those internships are ways for other people to see your work. Don't be shy and just work in the corner of the internship. When you're applying for the internship, ask questions about how much visibility your work will have throughout the organization. Because those people, even if the company doesn't hire you eventually as from an intern to a full-time employee, those people might know of opportunities that if you impress them, they would recommend you into. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Jared. Yeah, that was great. There was some great tips. And I think that pretty much answered Reed's question as well. But let me just read it quickly and just make sure if there is anything else you want to add. So Reed was asking how best approach looking for the first UX role after completing a bootcamp with no real network or UX experience, but have experience in tech and filmmaking. So I know you pretty much addressed this. Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I would challenge the premise that you have no real network. If you went to school, if you have experience in tech and filmmaking, then you work with other people. You don't need your network to just be UX people. Your network just needs to be people who know that there might be a position you could be good at. So use your tech, filmmaking, and education experience.
Thank you, Jared. All right, so I think you touched on this as well, but anything else you want to highlight in terms of what has changed recently in terms of what UX hiring managers look for? I know you basically highlighted the key thing was just having more of candidates with experience, but anything else?
Well, weirdly enough, I think a lot of them right now are looking for evidence that you used AI in your process. And if they find that you used AI in your process, that is a negative towards your actual authenticity. So I think you want to avoid AI. You don't want to let it write your resume. You don't want to let it create your portfolio. And you definitely don't want to use it to answer questions or do assignments or whatever. Because I think if they see anything that smells of AI, they're going to think that you're using AI because you're not qualified for the position. And so I I would go to the extreme and make every effort to be as authentic as you can and to not take advantage of AI. That doesn't mean you can't put your materials through a spell checker. I would definitely put my materials through a spell checker. But I would not use any phrasing that your grammar checker suggests that isn't how you would talk. Because that's one of the things they pick up on, right? Is that you've got a certain way of talking. You know, when I talk, I say a lot. I have certain phrases I use. I word things in a certain way. If my writing and my talking don't really match, they're going to wonder, did you write that? And so the way you present your case study should pretty much be the way you wrote up your case study. And that's how I would approach it. So that's one thing that I think. I think there's just the hiring managers I've been talking to are really, really wary of people trying to use large language model AIs, you know, ChatGPT, Claude, the various ones that are out there, to actually pretend to be someone they're not. And that's a negative. It's weird, right? Because all these companies are hiring for AI positions, but they don't want AI to do it. So I think that's a key piece to this, is that you want to make sure that you're as authentically you as you can be, which is also difficult because when you're talking on an interview, you're extremely nervous, which is probably making you feel a little less authentic because that's not how you are most of the time. And that's, you know, it's a challenge, but just be really, really, really careful about using AI. The other thing is, you really want to make sure that you're trying to understand what success is like for this position, for the hiring manager, and for the hiring manager's team. And you want to talk to that success, right? A great question to ask, right? So many times you'll have an interview, and at the end of the interview, they'll say, do you have any questions for me? And a great question to ask is, a year from now, what would you like to have this new person accomplish? If you could thank them for all the great work they did in their first year, what would you be thanking them for? That's a fantastic question, because that's going to get to the heart of what they want to see this person do. And might have to give them a moment, because there's a very good chance no one has ever asked them this before. But one of the things you can do is, if you get any hints um, uh, to about who you're going to be interviewing with before your interview, and you get like an email address, or maybe you get their name and you can look them up on LinkedIn, and you can send them a message on LinkedIn that says, I'm very excited about interviewing with. You could actually tell them, hey, one of the questions I want to ask you is, what does success look like for this position in the first year? A year from now, what would you like to be thanking the person who gets this job for having accomplished? And you could tell them that you're going to ask them that question. No one else is going to do that. And so you're stand out immediately. And because you're talking about what success looks like, that's something that should be in your favor. If you say to them, well, if your first question is, do I get any time off while I'm doing this job? Or, is it okay if I only work 4 days a week? That's not a good first question. But what does success look like for the person who's going to get this job? That's a fantastic first question. And drilling into their answer, getting them to elaborate as much as possible, will then help you figure out how to express your comparable experience. They say, well, we build trading desk software, and right now we're trying to figure out how to build this particular capability into our trading desk software, and that's a lot of what this person's going to work on. Then you can talk to whether you've done that before, what you know about that capability, what you would have to learn, and how you've learned things that are similar. And so this is really uh, a great way to engage with a hiring manager, to really find out what they're looking for, so that you can tailor what you say to them very directly.
Thank you, Jared. Yeah, this is great. And by the way, you guys have so many great questions here. Make my job really easy. Like it's so I know Jacqueline was one of the, so she sent her question. She was like the first person. All right, so let's take another question from Jacqueline here. So she's asking, I'm having immense difficulty creating portfolio samples from my last employer, a large financial services company. Here are a few of my issues. Many of the projects that I worked on were international markets and implemented in languages that most US recruiters and hiring managers speak. Example, German, Japanese, Swedish, etc. Many of my projects in English were for internal projects, and all of that work is considered proprietary. And I covered what blocks me from sharing based on the NDA I signed when I left the company. So what are your tips?
Well, an NDA only protects proprietary work. And from proprietary work, they have to be very specific as to what they're protecting. And so it's a company cannot prevent you from doing what you need to do to get another job. But what they're worried about is that you're going to release information into the world that will somehow harm them. And most NDAs are fairly specific about what it is. Now, sometimes they just say anything you do for us is covered by NDA, and you can decide whether you want to violate that or not, but they cannot stop you from talking about it. They can stop you. The NDA can prevent you from how you talk about it, right? You may not be able to name certain customers it was for. If you knew the names of those customers, you may not be able to talk about specific implementation details. It's so much of that is key, but uh the um the key thing here is that what the hiring manager is most interested in is, can you do the work I have, right? They're not that interested in the work you did. They're only interested in that work as far as it proves that you could do the work that the hiring manager has. So if you are prevented from showing specifics, like you can't show screens because they are protected, then talk about the work. Draw comparable screens that don't have the protected information in it. Whatever you do, don't do something like decide that if you put it behind a password, that's somehow okay. It's not. If you have made a promise that you would not tell people certain information, do not break that promise, right? Breaking a promise, if somebody shows me something, and I'll tell you, if when I'm looking at people's materials, if I come across something that's password protected, the first thing I do is I ask the candidate, are there things here you're not supposed to be showing people? And if they say, well, yeah, but you can see it. I'm like, no, if you're not supposed to be showing people, unless you have specific permission that you can show me, I don't want to see it. And so don't break that promise. If that's the promise you made, don't break it. But, if you had a screen that showed, let's say, since it was financial services, let's say it showed account transaction histories, right? Don't show an actual screen of account transaction histories, but talk about how you built a screen for account transaction histories, right? It can't possibly be a secret that if this is a financial services account and customers have accounts, that histories of the transactions in that account is somehow a trade secret. All financial services have histories. So you can talk about how you built the history. What were the challenges of the history? The actual screen that showed the history is probably the least important and the least interesting thing to the hiring manager. What they want to know is, what did you know? What didn't you know when you started the project? And what did you know when you ended the project? And how would that change the way you would design the next thing? More importantly, how would that, if you had to do account transaction histories for my project, what about that project would help you do it really well? And what things did you learn in the process that will make my project even better? And just remember, nobody cares about your past work except to tell them that you can do the future work they need you to do. So talk about the future work.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jared. So I know you talked about this briefly, but anything else you want to highlight in terms of how the UX hiring process is different currently versus what it was a few years ago? Like anything else? I know we already covered this.
So one of the things is people have a lot more experience than they had a few years ago because, there's been more jobs and more people. So a lot of people have a ton of experience. And what people make the mistake doing is when they create their portfolio, they put everything in it and they treat their portfolio like it's a museum that documents the work that you've done over your career. That's the wrong approach. You have to think of your portfolio as a sales brochure. You are selling into this future job, not the past work. You're not selling your past work. You're selling your ability to do the next work. And so it has to be convincing that you can do the next work. So, for example, I'm looking at we have a group of unemployed UX leaders that I meet with every week, and it's called Standout. Um, I can put some information about it into the chat. But the thing about this program is I was looking at one of the things we do is we go over people's portfolios and their resumes and whatnot. And this one person had a a um, a great work history. And they had several jobs in cybersecurity, a job in healthcare, a job in customer marketing tools. So they'd had a wide variety of things as their jobs. And the what I uh, what I noticed was that they had all of those things listed in their portfolio. And the thing is that if they were applying for a job that was, say, for a cybersecurity company, the hiring manager would only care about the cybersecurity jobs. So the other things should not be in their portfolio. If they were applying to a healthcare company, the hiring manager could care less about the cybersecurity job. They would only care about the healthcare design work that the person had done. And so what this means is you need to tailor your portfolio and your resume and your cover letter to the specifics of what the hiring manager is looking for, which might mean that you have 3 or 4 or 10 different versions of what that might look like. And that's very much a different approach than a lot of people take when they're putting together materials. They put together one set of generic materials that is just a museum of who they are and what they've done. And that's not going to get you to stand out. What's going to get you to stand out is if you are applying for a job in cybersecurity, what have you done in cybersecurity? Talk to me about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, that was great. We have another question from Stacy. And Stacy put 3 questions in one, basically, but we'll take it. But it's great. So Stacy is asking, Mr. Spool, thank you so much for explaining what are the reasons for the layoffs. All the context is so helpful to put into perspective. A few questions I have. What is your advice about reframing past experience to show you have some experience / knowledge, or is this not recommended? For example, I did a fashion project, but it reflects end-to-end UX process. B, is there by any chance a way for an applicant to know which postings are real and open to external candidates versus made for an internal candidate to take? And C, what other recommendations do you have for maintaining a long-term relationship with any of your new contacts so it's not awkward? That's great.
Okay, let's take those in order. So the first one is about reframing past experience. So the thing about if you did a fashion project, where I would go with that is I would look for jobs in the fashion industry, because the hiring managers there are going to be way more excited about anything you did in the fashion industry than that, because it's a complicated industry. And taking someone who knows nothing about fashion, and believe me, I've worked with a lot of UX people. Many of them are obviously they know nothing about fashion. I mean, look at me. So it is highly likely that you know a whole bunch of things that they don't know. I would sell that. I would make that about your experience in the fashion industry. And, that's everything from e-commerce for fashion type sites to working on marketing, and maybe something about the influencer world, or finding jobs where the products are they're sold through distributors, and you have to understand what the products are. I mean, as much as I would love to get a job in the makeup and aesthetic space, I would do miserable in a job in the makeup and aesthetic space, because I cannot tell you what the difference is between eyeliner and mascara. And so if you know that stuff because you've worked in that space, that's a huge leg up on people like me who might be competing for the same position. So this idea that the subtlety and nuance of a particular space because you've worked in it, that's where I would start. I would work around that. Even if your first job is just doing IT for a company that is in the distribution channels of retail fashion, knowing something about the nature of the products that you have in distribution, and for example, that you have to pay attention to color, and you have to pay attention to sizes, and you have to pay attention to the fact that inventory changes multiple times per year as fashion changes, and how the overstock business works, and all of those things, that's going to give you a leg up. So I wouldn't try to teach somebody that fashion is just like UX, because fashion is not just like UX. But I would focus on positions in industries where a knowledge of fashion is going to be a plus. Hopefully that makes sense. The second question, how does an applicant know whether postings are real or open to external candidates? It's the same damn AI thing. So this is a thing that apparently has been happening, that companies post positions they have no intention of filling. They never did this before, primarily because it cost a lot of money to post a job. And so and it not only cost money to post a job, but when you got the applications, someone had to go through them. Someone had to reply to every single one of them. You have to catalog all the applications you get for legal purposes so that you prove that you're not discriminating against certain categories of people. So there's all of this work and cost associated with advertising. But a lot of that's gotten automated. And because it's been automated, it's now free, or practically free to post a job. And it's free to post fake jobs. And so companies, in order to look really good to Wall Street, are apparently posting tons of fake jobs. So it looks like they're hiring hundreds or thousands of people that they have no intention of filling. So, a couple things about this. First, there's no way to tell. Second, do you want a company that is lying? Do you want to work for a company that lies to their investors? Because if they lie to investors, they also lie to their employees and they lie to their customers. You're dodging a bullet by not paying attention to these companies. So I wouldn't worry about it if it. And the thing is, if they're posting fake jobs, chances are they're not investing a lot of effort into describing what the position is. Maybe they just use ChatGPT to describe what the position is, at which point it's probably not going to match your comparable experience. So I wouldn't worry about it. The third question, what other recommendations do you have for maintaining a long-term relationship with any of your new contacts so it's not awkward? Oh, that's simple. Just say hi, right? It's not awkward to stay in touch with them. Just become friends. Check in with them. Keep notes about the last conversation you had with them and say, hey, how was that vacation you told me you were going on? Was it fun? Always wanted to go to Hawaii. What, just have a conversation. I, the way you have a long-term relationship with someone is you become friends with them and you mutually respect what they have to say. When they tell you about something that's not gone so well in their life, tell them that sounds really hard, and ask them if there's anything you can do to help. Just be a friend. Do what you would do if they were a friend.
Yeah, those are great points. I think, yeah, just to add to that, yeah, basically just build a relationship, right? And do something helpful for them, right? Don't just take, but like there's that great book, Give and Take. So give more, take less.
My wife and I joke that during the pandemic, a large portion of our social network turned out to be at the farmer's market, because the farmer's market was outside every week, and we would go and we would just talk to the people we saw there every week. I'd talk to the fish vendor and I'd talk to the vegetable vendor. And since we go to the same farmer's market every week I'd ask them how their week was. The fish at the time, the guy who ran the fish vendor, the fishmonger, he had a boat that he was taking out into the Atlantic, and he would show me the fish that he had caught himself, and and he'd show me pictures of it, and I took an interest in it. And now he's like a friend of mine. And I have his phone number. I text him and I say, how are things going? He opened a new restaurant in downtown Boston. I ask him how it's going. When we had an open house, because we moved into this house last summer, we had a little what do you call, housewarming thing. I invited him because I'd been filling him in on the construction, because he was building his restaurant at the same time we were building the house. So we were exchanging tips about working with contractors and architects. And I invited him. He brought his dad. I got to meet his dad. I mean, that's how you build friends, right? You just make friends. And he's now a contact. He knows what I do for a living, and I know what he does for a living. And if I were to find myself out of work, he might know something. He might not. I mean, he's a fishmonger, but he might know somebody, and his dad might know somebody, and that's how the network works.
Yeah, those are great points. I think like people just separate that too much. Like, oh, this is professional, this is networking. superficial and this is friendship. You just kind of mix it.
Yeah. My son is in his 30s. He's a software developer. He plays ultimate frisbee with a group of people every weekend that is basically mostly the same group of people every weekend. And when he was looking for work, he would just mention that he was in between things. And sure enough, one of them worked for a company that was hiring a software person, and he interviewed there. You know, go play frisbee.
All right. So Casey is asking, do you recommend posting work on LinkedIn?
Sure. Right? There's nothing wrong with, so there's a difference between posting work and uh really just actually, I don't know what I was going to say with that. The answer is yes. Go post your work on LinkedIn. It's a perfect place to post because it's not unusual for a hiring manager or recruiter to, when they get your application, to look at LinkedIn and look at what's on LinkedIn and look at what you post on LinkedIn. And if you have posted thoughts about your work, and by thoughts about your work, for example, talk about something that you didn't know at the beginning of a project that was hard to find out, but when you found it out, it's going to change the way you work from that point on. Maybe it's a new technique, maybe it's a type of design that you would do, maybe it's dealing with a back end technology issue, like you didn't know that the way the database works, it was going to constrain your designs, but now you understand how the database works. Talk about that adventure. Learn how to talk in narrative form. Narrative is just, this happened, and then this happened, and then this other thing happened. Talk about what happened, and then what was the reaction to that. And how did you get from the beginning of that project to the end of that project? Just around that issue of the thing you didn't know that you discovered during the project. It doesn't have to be the full project. It can just be that one little thing. And it might be, 200 words, 400 words, 500 words, not very long. But if you just post that, there will be people who see it because they follow you. But if, unless you're a crazy ass thought leader type like me, who posts every week snippets and little snarky things about the industry, there's a good chance that you don't have a large number of people who follow you. But that doesn't matter, because it's not for them. It's for the people who come looking at your LinkedIn because you've applied, or maybe you've reached out to somebody who you used to work with, and they know somebody, and they didn't want to say anything to you in case that didn't pan out, but they mentioned to a friend, hey, I just talked to Casey, and Casey's looking for work. Here's their LinkedIn. Maybe they'd be right for that position you were saying we're going to hire for. And so now that person's coming, and the first thing they're going to see are the posts that you made. And in there is you talking about what was challenging and how you overcame the challenge. Now, from that, they might decide you don't have enough experience, because the types of challenges you ran into are for someone who's early in their career and they're looking for someone with more experience. But it might be that the type of challenge you came over is exactly like the types of challenge a new person's going to have. And you'll be perfect for this job because you obviously know how to overcome challenges, which is a big thing that they want their new employee to do. So, yeah, I think it's a brilliant idea. I think you should go do that.
Thank you, Jared. So I see a great question from Jess, but I want to come back to it in a second, because this is more like about future and focusing and picking what areas to focus on. By the way, just a couple of quick books, since we talked about networking. Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. Great about networking, relationship building, give and take, Adam Grant. And also the one that I always tell about is the one with this best name called 2 Hour Job Search. It's to the point, and so what's going to take 2 hours is obviously not the actual job search, but the system that you set up for informational interviews and networking, etc. So, and I'm not affiliated actually, but probably should be by now. All right, let's take a quick question from Sam. So Sam is asking how to showcase yourself better, how to sell yourself. Like, I feel like I'm great at my UX job and have a good personality, but I feel my portfolio doesn't showcase that. So I don't even get interview calls. How can I do better and get that attention?
So I would here's the advice I give people. Uh, I would start with the here's what I would do. The first thing I would do is I would find you need two things, right? I'm gonna give you a little recipe that has two ingredients. The first ingredient is you need at least one job ad that matches two criteria. The first criteria is that everything in that job ad, you feel like you have a story to tell about how you've done that before, right? So you can look through the ad, you can see the bullets, you can see the paragraph descriptions, and for every sentence in there, you're like, oh, I definitely can do that. I can do that too. It says, be a contributing member to a cross-functional team that delivered great results to customers. Yeah, I have a story about how I worked on a cross-functional team and we delivered great results to our customers, right? So you want to go through every bullet and make sure you have a story. And then the second criteria is if you could do those things again, it would be great. You would really like it. So, if it's all stuff you can do, but you never want to do it again, then it's not such a great experience, right? So that doesn't meet the criteria. So the job ad has to meet those two criteria. You have stories for everything, and you would like to do it again. Okay. The second ingredient is you need a really good friend. And by really good friend, I mean somebody who would be honest with you if they felt you weren't doing your best. And they would say, no, Sam, not good enough. Try it again, right? And what you're going to do with the best friend in the job ad is the two of you are going to write tell me about a time questions. That's what I mean. So tell me about a time when you worked on a cross-functional team and you delivered great results to your customer, right? You just take every bullet and you translate them into tell me about a time. And then with your best friend, you have your best friend ask you the question, and then you tell the best friend the story. And if the story is not interesting or compelling, it feels like it doesn't get into quite enough detail, it really doesn't prove that you can absolutely do that. You want your friend to say, not good enough, try it again. And you just keep practicing the stories. That's the most important thing. I think people jump too soon into writing a case study without practicing what the story is about the case study. What is it you're trying to communicate to the hiring manager that proves that you have worked on a cross-functional team that's delivered great results to the customer? Right. And so you you start there. And so that's phase one. So now you know what your stories are. The second phase of this recipe, step two, is you ask yourself, which of those stories would be easier to explain if I had visuals, right? If I had a picture to show while I was making that explanation. And that will tell you what visuals you need to communicate your point. And then that's the second one. And again, you practice it until it feels second nature. And then the third phase, this is the final step of this process, is you repeat it, except this time you create materials that explain the story when you're not in the room. Because that's what the portfolio that you use for applying for a job has to do. It has to basically tell your story when you can't be there to tell it yourself. And so that's the three-phase process. And so it's in that third phase that you really learn what you need your portfolio to tell. That's what's going to, so to answer the question, how do you get your portfolio to showcase your best work? Well, it's not to showcase your best work, it's to tell your story in the most effective way. So hopefully that helps, Sam. Oh,
Awesome.
I hope it helps other people in addition to Sam.
Yeah, that was great. That was so let's come back. Okay, so Stacy asked another question which got the most upvotes so far. So let's come back to that.
Congratulations, Stacy. You win.
Yeah, we're gonna run a competition here. The question with the most upvotes. So make sure, just a reminder, make sure you review others' questions, upvote them, and also write some good additional questions so maybe you could win. All right, so Stacy's, and it's actually a much shorter question. So you mentioned cover letters. What recommendations do you have to make them compelling and interesting to actually read?
That's a great question. The simple answer to that is the cover letter basically explains how you're going to be perfect achieving all the things in the first year that the hiring manager wants you to achieve. Now, the problem is you haven't talked to the hiring manager yet. So you're sort of guessing what they want you to achieve. But that's basically what it is. And the way I like to think of a cover letter is it's an index to your resume and your portfolio. It basically tells the hiring manager what to pay attention to. So if this is a company that makes trading desk software in the financial industry, and maybe you worked in that space, but that was 2 jobs ago, you want to say in the cover letter, I have worked in the trading desk industry, in the financial industry on trading desk software when I was at such and such a company, which I worked from 2019 to 2021. And the projects that I did there was this project and this project. And you will see them as the first 2 cases in my portfolio. And here's the links to those things. And you can basically give them the tour of your resume and your portfolio as they are interested. Imagine you are working at a museum and your job is to give people tours of the museum, and you have someone come up, a big donor of the museum, really important person, and they say to you, my favorite art are Salvador Dali pictures. Well, if you're smart, you're going to take them straight to the Salvador Dali picture. You're not going to say, well, before we look at Salvador Dali, here's a bunch of Rembrandts, right? You're going to take them to the thing they're most interested in. This is what the cover letter does. It gives a tour of your experience to the things that, as far as you can tell, are the things that they're most interested in.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, that was great. That was so Stacy, thank you for the great question. So for now, you hold the title. We're looking for the next champ.
We have a trophy for you.
All right. Okay, amazing questions. Keep those coming. Jared, anything else you want to mention in terms of the biggest things that prevent candidates from getting hired to make them look less attractive to employers? And what would that answer be also for early career or more junior candidates? Like, would it be any different?
Um, I I think there are lots of things that would in this market that are going to make it hard that you have no control over, right? If you apply to a job that hundreds of people have applied to and it's almost impossible to not do that, there's a good chance no one's going to ever see your materials, right? I mean, it's just if they find a perfect candidate, uh, you know, if they have 150 things to look at, and candidate number 61, they find the perfect one, and you were candidate number 62 just in the way they were doing it, they may never open your resume. It's just the way it works. And so I think you can't take this stuff personally. You can try your best and you can get there. The issues, the things that I see is you make the hiring manager do too much work to figure out that you're the best person they could hire, right? And by that I mean, well, let me put it simply. I was talking to this really lovely person who has 9 years of experience in UX. 4 of them she would consider to be a UX designer. Before that, she was doing website design and mostly UI stuff. And so one of the things that I do is when people ask me to look at their resume or their portfolio, I always ask them for a job ad. Show me the job ad you want this for, because I don't believe you can tell whether a resume or a portfolio is any good unless you have a job ad to compare it to. And basically, what I'm looking for in the job ad is when they said they need this, can I obviously see in the materials that you have done that? So for this particular candidate, she saw herself as a senior UX designer. Now, remember, titles mean nothing. There are no standard titles in our industry. So every title, they don't mean anything to anybody. So you can call yourself anything you want to be. So these are this is key. But the job ad she shared with me was it was a job ad that was a little odd, but she really liked it for some reason. And what made it odd was the title on the job ad was web page design specialist. And it was clear that this job was basically a visual design job, though there would be some UX components to it, for creating websites. And I don't know, I couldn't tell from the job ad whether it was like a company that does websites for restaurants, for example, which, there's a whole industry of companies that do website, a restaurant doesn't want to have a dedicated UX person. They can't afford it. So they hire an agency and you go and you build websites for them. But that's how it was. And if you look through the job ad, Thing was like, you can create web pages that do this. You've created web pages that do that. It was all about web pages. It was written by somebody who probably doesn't understand UX, who has a company that builds web pages for people. And um, and she seemed to think that this was a good job for her. But if you looked at her resume, it was all in UX language. You couldn't tell which projects she'd worked on web pages, what she did on those web pages, anything about that. So it didn't match the job ad. And that's a huge mistake. She felt she could do everything in that ad, but nothing in her materials told that story. And that's where a lot of people get in trouble. I saw an ad where instead of talking about a design system, they talked about a pattern library. Now, this is a bone of contention amongst people who build uh, um, design systems. Is it a pattern library? Is it not a pattern library? You know, whatever. The fact is, whoever wrote the ad wants somebody who knows how to build a pattern library. If you think you can build a pattern library, then damn it, say you've built pattern libraries, right? Who cares what they're called, right? I see so many people get upset over UX UI positions, but UX UI positions make some amount of sense. You need someone who can do the UX, you need someone who can do the UI. You can only afford one person. You know, why not? Talk about UI, talk about UX, talk about how you've done both. You can be good at both. Just like, someone could hire someone, a restaurant could hire someone who can cook steaks and make great desserts. Why not? If you don't want to work in a job where you do UI work, then don't apply for the job. But if you're good at them and it's work you want to do, don't get all whack out over the title. Use whatever title they want to hire you for. If you use a different title, you're basically sending the message that you didn't pay attention to what they're asking for. And they see that as a red flag because they're going to, if you get the job, they're going to ask you for lots of things and they want to make sure you can pay attention.
All right. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, that's great. Makes a lot of sense. I also want to take a question from Kristen and then come back to Jess. And then we will have to wrap up somewhat soon, right? Because we are running a little bit short on time. But I do want to take a few more quick questions. So Kristen is asking, hey, Jared, I really appreciate your advice on one-on-one conversations with people in the industry. When you are at a networking event that's specifically for UX professionals, how do you typically approach someone? Do you go straight to the point or do you ease into it with something like, hi, how are you? Before getting to the I'm looking for a job part.
So there's a debate as to what networking events are supposed to be. To me, they are sort of like speed dating. And I'm not sure they're that valuable. If there's any value in a networking event, it's to figure out if you want to be friends with this person going forward. Because there's probably a very little chance that they know of a job you'd be perfect for. Maybe they do. Maybe they went on an interview for a job that they didn't want because they're snobby about the UX UI thing, but you are happy with that. And they know of that. So they're like, well, you should apply to it because I don't want it. Maybe that'll happen, but it's probably not what's going to happen. What's really going to happen is you discover that you both like tennis and Airbnb and D&D. And that's going to be way more interesting. So just find out, whenever you meet anybody, show interest in them. What, what are they, what good things have happened in their life recently, right? If it's a professional thing, there's a simple question, which is, tell me about the project you worked on that you're most proud of. And then ask them a million questions about the project. What was fun about it? What was challenging about it? How long did they do it? What things that they learned in previous jobs turned out to be really valuable in this one? What things they learned in this project turned out to be really valuable in following projects, right? Just show interest in their stuff. You can ask them all the questions in the world, and eventually they'll come around and start asking you questions, and that'll be great. What you really want to do is collect enough information so that when you follow up with them afterwards, you have something more to talk to them about. Because if you don't have any reason to talk to them again, it's not really networking. It's just you went and met a bunch of strangers, and now you're done meeting a bunch of strangers. Right? If it's real networking, basically your plan. Someone explained networking to me. One of the people in our standout community explained networking to me the way she saw it is you are planting an apple orchard, and it can take years for apples to show up on the tree the first time. So when you have a networking event, you're putting new seeds in the ground, and you want to nurture those seeds over a long period of time. So maybe next time you're looking for work, they could be valuable for you. Don't think of it as transactional. If I give this person information, they'll give me information I need right now. It's not how it works. It's not how networking works. What you want to do is you want to really learn about them. And then you have something to talk to them about. And if they think you're nice, they'll ask you about what's happening in your life. I mean, you can give them hints if they say something about the project. It's like, oh man, I had to work on a project like that too. Or if they say something about something that was challenging, it's like, oh, I've never had that challenge, but here's a challenge I had. You share things and you build a friendship. And friendships are based on common interests. That's the best advice I have about that.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think that's what also changed kind of my perception of networking. Like initially I was like, it's this networking, it's like sleazy thing, but when you think about it as relationship building, like mutually beneficial relationships and helping people, maybe they will help you, maybe you help them, that just reframes. And that's why actually, so Mika posted those books that we mentioned earlier. So that can be really helpful, right? If you think about it that way, it's actually more interesting and more fun too.
Yeah.
All right, so Marilyn is asking a question. I've been a UX designer in the past in my home country, but now as I'm applying for internships, I want to try out for both UX design and UX research. How do I showcase both of those profiles together?
Why? uh, uh, I mean, it's not the right way to think about this. The right way to think about this is if you have a job ad in front of you, which is a combined design and research job, tell the story about how you would use what you've done in design and use what you've done in research to do this job. That's when you're saying showcasing your work, you're basically just providing evidence that you can do the work of this job. So you need the job ad first. And if the job ad is a design only job ad, then you just talk about design. And if it's a research only job ad, then you just talk about the research. Maybe you hint at the fact that you've done design too, but that's not what a research manager cares about. Research manager cares that you've done research. If that's the job, that's the job. However, if you find a job where they're looking for someone who can do design and research, that's when you talk about both of them. But you talk about them as if they were one job, not as I did design when I was doing design and then I did research when I was doing research. Now, that may be how you did them, but remember, they're not interested in what you did. They're interested in what you can do and how your past work predicts what you can do. So talk about their job in terms of how your past work predicts their job. It's a very subtle, nuanced distinction that a lot of people don't get right. And it's really important if you want them to get really excited about taking you to the next step in the process, right? They open up your portfolio and they're going, oh my gosh, this Maryland person, I think this is our person. I really want to get them in here for an interview. Let's get them in here for an interview, right? That's what you want to happen. So you better make it clear you can do their job.
Thank you, Jared. Appreciate that. How are we doing on time, by the way? I know we're a little bit short on time on our side. How about you? I want to be mindful of your time as well.
I am being told that dinner is ready.
Okay, okay.
I have
So
received messages from the beyond that says that dinner is waiting.
all right. So in that case, let's do this. Let's just take the last question, which I promised to take from Jess, and I'll combine it with the question I wanted to ask you as well about. So it's kind of the futuristic type of thing. So Jess is asking, what are your thoughts on the emergent segments in UX, referring to AI slash voice slash chats, VR technology? Would it behoove a designer to pivot their focus to these segments? Any other segments I'm not thinking of? And plus, just to add to that, in general, Jared, what is your overall outlook on the future of like more generalist UX roles versus specialists, and why?
Um, so I have long been a believer that there is no such thing as a specialist UX person, right? UX is UX. There are skills and there's experience, and the skills and experience predict what you can do in your next job. But in your next job, you're going to learn more skills and you're going to get more experience. So as you do more and more jobs, you just grow skills and experience. This notion of a specialist doesn't make sense. That I only do research in my specialty because or I only do AI and that's my specialty, because that sort of forces you down a path that says, well, if next week we run out of AI work, I guess we should just get rid of you, right? And I don't think that's what you want to have a hiring manager thinking. So if there's work like that, you probably want it to be as open as possible for success. Now, given that, um, uh, uh, the what I was what I'm thinking here is that if someone is doing work in virtual reality, let's say, chances are they really only care about your virtual reality work. Because if they are going to hire someone who knows nothing about virtual reality, they probably already have a bunch of people on their team who could do that, right? So they'll get somebody they know that isn't you. So if they're thinking about you, it's because you've got virtual reality background. But while you're there, it might be a virtual reality chat product, and they're looking for someone who knows something about virtual reality because that's really hard to train, but the chat portion is probably pretty easy. Okay, then you go do, you'll learn about chat while you're there. And the next time you have a conversation, it's about chat and VR. It's very rare these days that people are hiring people who have a blank slate and thinking, well, whatever it is, we could just train them on. There are some things that are that way. Brand new technologies. Like, let's say you were working on the project was working on self-driving cars. There are so few people who've done X for self-driving cars that they're not thinking they're going to hire somebody. They're going to have to teach people how to do the UX for self-driving cars. But I mean, even in the automotive industry now, there are enough people who've done UX of car dashboards that they look for that and they want that experience. If you work in healthcare on surgical tools, they want the experience that you've worked on surgical tools, because there's all sorts of embedded knowledge about surgical tools that they don't want to have you come up to speed on. So it's the emerging segments thing. These are not real segments. AI is not a segment. VR is not a segment. They're just skill sets and experience. And someday, VR might be something that people actually use on a regular basis, and that'll be a useful set of skills. It's certainly not today. So, maybe you have a toy project there, but nobody's got real VR experience, or very few people have it, because it's a solution looking for a problem. It's not actually anything anybody cares about.
All right, Jared, this was awesome. Thank you so much. So I hope you guys enjoyed the event and got some great insights. And by the way, Jared, what is the best way for the folks in the audience to find or connect with you?
So we have a free community called Leaders of Awesomeness, which you can join. And we talk about this stuff. In a few weeks, we're going to spend a whole hour talking about what you put into an ideal portfolio. We do free presentations every Monday, so you can come to that. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Let me go find me on LinkedIn first, and then I will post the link to me so that you can find me on LinkedIn. Here it is. There. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And in the meantime, between those two things, I'm available for stuff. We also have, we have a set of tips that we've put together, some of which I've shared tonight, for people searching for their next UX job. It's a set of videos. It costs $20. Here, let me put it in here. which is the lowest cost we can offer on the platform that we use. So if you want a whole bunch of more tips on these similar topics, that's an opportunity for you too. So those are sort of the best ways to get the most out of what we're talking about here tonight.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so we'll leave the chat open for a bit so you guys have a chance to save everything if you would like to. All right, so if you guys want even more free UX career resources, you can also go to resources section on our site and enjoy. So we have lots of event recordings from that as well. Mika is going to put the link in the chat. Awesome. So we're going to run different type of virtual events. So we'll keep you updated about upcoming events and share resources with via our newsletter that is usually sent every week or so, maybe every few weeks. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you so much, Jared, for taking the time to join us and provide all the valuable insights. It was a pleasure to have you here again.
Oh, it was lovely to be here. And now I have to go and something honey nut squash.
All right. On that note, thank you so much.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye. Take care.